Right mates, how's it going? In today's video, chapter 11 of Illidan by William King. So this chapter gets pretty dark towards the end, self-harm and stuff. Just thought I'd give you a bit of a warning before we get started. But let's go! After Vandel awoke from his vision, he was understandably a bit worse for wear. His head was spinning. All the while, the demon meat in his stomach was still trying to fight its way free, because he was dry heaving quite a bit as well. But what was weird was that although the thought of eating it sickened him, he was also craving more. All around him he could hear screams and moans, and the air itself smelled of rotting flesh, gangrene, pus and poop. At regular intervals, he'd hear the clippity-clop of hooves moving around on the stone floor, and somebody would swab him with a sponge every now and then, which annoyed him a little bit, because he just wanted to be left alone. Broken Moon! Demon Moon! That voice seemed familiar, but Vandel couldn't quite place it. Demons approach! Demons approach! The sound of leathery wings then snapped, and Vandel could feel the air swirl around his face.
On your feet. You have rested long enough.
What's the point? I can't see.
I thought the same once, but I now see to the end of the universe. It's closer than most think.
I know.
And you also know what we fight, and why.
But how can we fight them? It's impossible. Apocalyptic visions then flooded Vandel's mind, all whilst his demonic passenger snickered in the background.
Stand up.
Vandel immediately lurched to his feet, and the world spun once more, but a clawed hand dug into his shoulder and held him upright. I can't see!
You can see everything.
Vandel's head then spun faster. There were somehow writhing worms of light flickering around his field of vision, if you can call it that. He reached out with his hand, trying to slap him away, but that didn't really achieve anything, and as he twisted round to where Illidan stood, he saw a blaze of light that appeared to be wing-shaped.
You tricked me. You told me you'd give me the power to fight demons, to avenge my family. I have given you all that and more.
Illidan's blazing aura then moved, and Vandel turned his head, tracking it, and he found himself biting his lips so hard that he'd drawn blood. He was bloody furious. So furious, in fact, that he sprang forward and tried to punch the wing-shaped blaze of light. But something knocked his feet from under him, and he hit the ground and rolled towards another swirling aura. As he reached it, he felt the contact of flesh and heard a feverish voice being all like, yeah. He sniffed the air and smelled soiled bandages and the tainted odour of demon, and it made him real hungry. So hungry that he sprang forward again and bit into the appendage of whatever this other swirling mass of groaning light was. But a powerful hand caught him by the neck and lifted him into the air.
Enough! You must learn to control that which lies within you, or it will control you.
Vandel attempted to throw an elbow backwards, but once again found himself flying across the room. The impact hurt, but not as much as it should have, and it definitely wasn't enough to make him calm down. He was still bloody furious. Illidan was keeping him from his prey. However, as he turned back towards the betrayer's glowing aura, he noticed it become sharper and blaze even brighter. It seemed to shift into new patterns as Illidan moved his fingers and arms. When Vandel realised he was observing fell magic being bound to Illidan's will as the betrayer drew upon its power. And a second or so later, a bolt of it leapt from Illidan's finger and struck Vandel right in the chest. But that definitely hurt enough to make him calm down. Enough to clear his head and finally realise what was happening to him. The demon I devoured. It's still within me, isn't it?
Yes, and it wants to be free.
How can I control it?
Walk with me.
Why are you helping me?
Because you know who the true enemy is. Because you have great potential. I have need of fighters like you before the end.
Still dizzy and weak, Vandel picked himself off the ground once again, and then looked around and had a little think about the flickering lights and stuff. He was somehow perceiving where things were, without having any eyes. Is this how you see the world?
Your mind becomes accustomed to it eventually. There will come a time when you are able to perceive the world as you once did.
You're saying I'll be able to shift from seeing things like this to seeing as if I had eyes?
In many different ways as well. In a way, it is like working magic. You get a feel for the flows of power, a sense of the souls of the living and the unliving.
Illidan and Vandel then walked towards a doorway. Vandel could sense its lack of density in the air. He also sensed there were living things beyond it, powerful beings, and they were waiting for something. But he still managed to collide into a table as he walked through.
Lie down on it.
Why?
You are about to receive your first tattoos.
Vandel fumbled at the table with his hands and felt the texture of it, and realised his sense of touch was something he'd always taken for granted. He could feel every grain of the wood, every knot, and every splinter. He could also feel areas that were slightly rougher, as if the carpenter had got to a certain point and then been like, whatever, the table's finished. He then lay down on the table, and leather straps snapped into place around him, which caused him to panic a little bit.
You will learn to do these for yourself one day, but for now, you must accept them from others. Be still. This will hurt.
Someone else in the room then leaned forward, and something so hot it felt cold touched Vandel's flesh, and he wanted to scream. The voice inside his head was not enjoying this, and Vandel could feel its fear spread through him. This was a trap. Evil magic or something. A needle stabbed in once more, and pain blasted Vandel's entire body. Probably the most pain he'd felt since he pulled his own eyes out. He started thrashing about, trying to free himself, but the restraining bands were doing their job pretty well. As the needle stabbed again and again though, the voice in his head started to grow weaker and weaker, and the panic and fear he felt began to subside. And then it was over. The straps holding him down were undone, and he was allowed to rise from the table. I'm glad that's over.
The worst is just beginning.
Sometime later, Vandel was in a small cell-like room. But Vandel had been in this cell since receiving his tattoos. It had taken him the whole day to recover from that experience. But now he felt okay-ish. As he lay there, he touched and checked his empty eye sockets. They were still empty. Next, Vandel started to feel his new tattoos. But as he traced the ink, he felt something else embedded in his skin. Something weird. The places around his body that had been touched by demon blood had transformed. He'd acquired scales. He also now had sharp claws and sharp fangs. And this transformation had occurred after he'd received his new mystical tattoos. And all of this combined made Vandel feel extremely depressed. He was turning into the thing he hated most. Suicidal thoughts then entered Vandel's mind, and he felt compelled to reach over to the bedside table where his knife lay, but he stopped himself. He wasn't thinking clearly. Something was affecting his mind.
You are seeing clearly. You are seeing yourself as you are. Illidan is mad. You are mad.
Maybe the voice was right. Maybe he was insane. He'd always suspected it. Vandel then felt overwhelmed by self-loathing, picked up his knife, and inserted it under the edge of one of his new scales, and then cut it out. In his mind, if he could remove all the scales, he could stop the transformation. Like a surgeon cutting out a patch of gangrene. Vandel continued to cut again and again, until he was absolutely covered in blood, and it wasn't until he started to feel dizzy and weak from losing so much of his own blood that he realised he might actually die from doing this. A thought that seemed to make something within him laugh hysterically. Ah, balls. The demon was still toying with him, tapping into his dark thoughts and self-hatred. So he stood up and fumbled his way out into the corridor. Another one! Get a karma! And then he passed out. Some more time later, Vandel awoke. Again. Someone was stood over him, and they smelled like a broken.
You are a karma? Yes, you are Vandel. You clearly impressed Lord Illidan. He asked me to look after you personally.
Are you a healer?
I am. I do what I can to help the sick and the wounded.
And which am I? Sick or wounded?
Bit of both, I would say. And something else as well. There's a taint in you. I'm not a big fan of it.
Well, thank you for your help, anyway.
You're welcome. You're lucky the guards found you in time. You're the 5th new recruit that's attempted suicide in the past 2 days. But you're the only one that's lived.
I did not attempt suicide.
Well, what would you call it then? You hacked at your own flesh until you almost bled to death. You would have, if you'd hit an artery. What has Illidan done to you?
You don't know.
All I know is that Lord Illidan takes many of your people into that courtyard and only a few come out. And those of you that do survive are altered beyond recognition. If he's trying to create an army, he's chosen a funny way of doing it.
Lord Illidan has his reasons. If he wants you to know, he'd share them with you.
Well, that's true, I suppose. There's a good deal of things that occur in this temple that it's best not to ask about.
As if to emphasise that point, a mighty bellow sounded from deep below ground. The stones of the temple seemed to vibrate, in time to the roaring.
Another monster bound in the temple's defence.
But Vandel wasn't listening to Akama anymore, because he was fixated on something the Broken had said but a few moments ago. 4 others had killed themselves. Bloody hell! When Illidan had said that about 1 in 5 recruits would make it, Vandel had assumed the betrayer was talking about the ritual itself. Things really were just beginning, and the worst of it still lay ahead. And we're leaving it there! So yeah, pretty dark stuff. Didn't really feel right putting a lot of silly little jokes in this one. But the next chapter is actually from 3 perspectives. Bit of Illidan, bit of Maiev, bit of Akama. So that should be exciting. As usual, link in the description if you're interested in buying this book. Also, there's links to my Discord server and my Patreon page too. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, all of that bollocks. And all that's left to say is, thanks for watching, and see ya!